The idea of a Guild Wars 3 has been a topic of debate for a very long time now, but it has really spiked in popularity within the last year. I recently made a video detailing all my thoughts about what a potential Guild Wars 3 could look like or mean, which I'll share down in the description if you are interested. Ultimately, no one knows what is coming in the future for the Guild Wars franchise, and we will only ever know when something is announced. But the idea is still interesting to think about, so I want to dive into the idea of what the story of a potential Guild Wars 3 could look like, or the story of some potential Guild Wars 3 adjacent games, such as offshoots of the main MMORPG-centric franchise. So, let's get started. First, let's talk about a potential Guild Wars 3 specifically. When we look at Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2, we have two games that are set in a linear timeline. The events of Guild Wars, its campaigns, and its expansion happened one after another. We then saw a pretty big time skip detailed within the movement of the world that then led into Guild Wars 2 with all of its expansions following it. Now when it comes to Guild Wars 3, it could realistically be set at any point. It could happen in between the two games during that time skip, or it could even happen before the original Guild Wars, and maybe even focus on something like the Guild Wars, which ended right before the original game. Another idea is that Guild Wars 3 takes place alongside Guild Wars 2, but happens in a completely different part of Tyria. This scenario would specifically be good because it would make it easier for ArenaNet to develop both Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 3 at the same time instead of dropping 2 in favor of 3, without making the narratives feel weird. If you develop a story in Guild Wars 3 for its base game, that then doesn't make sense because of a Guild Wars 2 expansion that releases in real time after the base launch of Guild Wars 3, things can feel a little weird and retcon-y. But if both games happen at the same time, it would be easier to develop those ideas together. But what I believe to be the most realistic scenario that I personally would want the most, and what I think the most amount of people would like, is that Guild Wars 3 takes place following a time skip, following the final story update of Guild Wars 2. The time skip between the first and second games was 250 years, and that was a pretty good amount of time, but maybe on the longer end of things. You need a good amount of time for most characters in the original game to have died, with some long-living characters like Ogden Stonehealer to still be around because that is fun and makes sense. You also need enough time to pass so that the world feels fresh and different than how it was in the previous game, but you don't want it to be so long that the universe feels wildly, vastly different. I think maybe a weak point that we see that is a good example of what people don't want from a longer time skip is how Cantha feels so vastly different in Guild Wars 2 than the original Guild Wars, and it feeling different makes complete and total sense with the story and with the amount of time that has passed. But people who have nostalgia for how Cantha is in the original Guild Wars are less happy with the Guild Wars 2 version. I think this is doubly important with the technological advancements we see in the setting of Guild Wars 2 compared to the original Guild Wars, and I think that might be a tough thing to balance for ArenaNet. So many video game universes follow a common trope known as medieval stasis, where there isn't a lot of technological advancement that happens in the game because the game is set around a specific idea, like swords and castles and stuff, that people play that game for because swords and castles and stuff are fun. And while Guild Wars 2 has a lot of technological stuff compared to the original Guild Wars, it still feels very grounded in the vibes of medieval fantasy, but when it comes to Guild Wars 3, a decision has to be made. Will there not be a lot of technological advancement, and will the game still feel like Guild Wars 2? Or will there be a logical amount of technological advancement in, let's say, a 250-year period? If so, Guild Wars 3 may not really feel as medievally as the original Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 are, and may feel more like a science fiction game. And while that would make sense lore-wise with the Asura, Canthans, Char, and everyone else evolving, it would maybe be something that a lot of people wouldn't like because they fell in love with the vibes and aesthetics of either Guild Wars or Guild Wars 2. I talked about in previous videos that maybe we see the magics of Tyria hampered because of the shenanigans of Vlox. And this could also tie into Aurene and her new dragon cycle where she sucks in all the magics of Tyria, drastically reducing the amount of available magic in the world for the next 10,000 years or whatever, and specifically only giving a certain amount. Through this would easily eliminate the idea of Magitech advancing so much with Cantha and the Asura, so we won't see the Asura building interdimensional spaceships in 250 years. but that still leaves the technological advancement of steam and oil and whatever else space engineering that we see, especially with the Char and their weapons of war, and also with other ideas like airships and what the engineers can do. Through this, I would then feel like maybe Guild Wars 3's aesthetics would feel pretty similar to Guild Wars 2, with maybe less waypoint and a surrogate type of stuff going on and more Char-based technology going on. There's also then the story idea that a future catastrophic event in Guild Wars 2 is going to knock the planet of Tyria back a ton, maybe even technologically and socially back to how it was before the original Guild Wars, which would take away all the technology that we see in Guild Wars 2 and be more in line with the original Guild Wars. And honestly, it could be anything. For what I personally would want the most and for what I think is most likely to happen, I feel like we may see a smaller time skip between Guild Wars 2 and a potential Guild Wars 3. I think something like 80 years would be a good amount of time for most characters in Guild Wars 2 to die, the most important being the commander. The biggest question is what the lifespan of the Savari are and if they can even die of natural causes, which is a question that would have to be tackled in Guild Wars 3. But 80 years lets those people die and also pushes the world forward a decent chunk, but not as much as we saw with Guild Wars 2, so the contrast between Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 3 is smaller than 1 and 2, but still different. An idea that may support a smaller time skip is what we see going on with the wider world building in Guild Wars 2. Janthir Wilds was a phenomenal story specifically in how much world building happened during it. The Terran Alliance is realistically a really big deal, and is kind of like the Pact, but 1,000 times bigger when you think about it. And through the Tyrian Alliance story instances that we saw, we got bits and pieces of news about pretty much every nation and culture across Tyria and how their individual societies are evolving. Now, especially during the time of Janthir Wilds, I thought this was doing a lot to set up future expansions for Guild Wars 2, and it could really well be that. But for the sake of speculation, all of this could be setting up the story and setting for Guild Wars 3. Over the course of 80 years, we will see every single nation and people across Tyria change a decent amount, and we can see the start of that happening in Guild Wars 2, and then we will explore how everything has changed over the course of 80 years, or however much time may be skipped, in a Guild Wars 3. Now, with Guild Wars 3, we can be covering any area of Tyria and any amount of different people, but let's quickly go over the biggest groups we see present within the Tyrian Alliance meetings, even if not full members. We have the Savari, the Free City of Lion's Arch, the Char High Legions, Kryta, Cantha, the Echovod Free Territory, the Asura, the Norn, the Republic of Alona, the Dominion of Winds, the Wizard's Court and Astral Ward, the Lowland Coden, the Three Orders of the Pact, the Drytop and Skritsburg Skrit, the Togato and Itzelheilig, the Coden of Deep and Troubled Waters, the Coden and Quaggan of Sorrow's Eclipse, and the Free Awakened. That's a lot of people, and it's a pretty good summary of the entire Guild Wars 2 story from launch to present day. But it could also be the foundation for what we see with Guild Wars 3, and how these people may be a major focus on the stories of Guild Wars 3. And when we take each one individually, we can really do a lot to speculate about how each nation will change in a potential 80-year time skip. Ilona is doing a lot to rebuild after Palawajoko and is kind of on the verge of a civil war. Cantha is doing a lot to restabilize their society after the loss of Siwan and how Dragon Jade changed. The Savari is still dealing with the fallout of Mordermoth and the Pale Tree's condition. The Dominion of Winds is still dealing with their slightly xenophobic policies. The Char High Legions are still dealing with the fallout of their civil war and the potential of a new Conair. The Asura are actively, in the current Guild Wars 2 story, very unstable as a society, and we could see massive reformations to the Arcane Council. The Norn and Coda could potentially leave Central Tyria and head back north now that Jormag is defeated, and similar ideas for every nation and society in Tyria, all of which could happen between Guild Wars 2 and a Guild Wars 3, or be major story beats within Guild Wars 3. Likewise, all of these could be major story beats in Guild Wars 2 with any future expansions we may get. And I think this big idea leads into the idea of potential Guild Wars offshoots. When we think of Guild Wars, we think of MMORPGs, and I do think those will always be the main games we see. But there could really easily be offshoots of Guild Wars that takes place in this universe, but are much smaller in scale and are in a different genre of video games. I and many others have always floated around the idea of a Guild Wars RTS game, and there are many other genres like open world single player RPGs or adventure games that could happen. But with any of those games, we could see them focus on some of the stories we have talked about here. An RTS game is interesting because typically you see factions. Some games like StarCraft 2 have only 3 factions, or Warcraft 3 with 4 factions, but a game like Age of Empires 2 has, I believe, 53. Now, when it comes to a Guild Wars RTS game, it would most likely be in the realm of 3 or 4. One idea that always stuck out to me is a game that covers the potential of an Elonian civil war. We saw in Living World Season 4 that there were 4 big factions following the defeat of Palo Joko, with the Awakened Remnants, the Morden Crescent, the Free Awakened, and the Order of Shadows. In addition, we also have more groups like the Free People of Elona and the Sunspears. Now, all these groups fighting each other wouldn't make too much sense with how the story has gone, but we could see it easily split up. You can have an Elonian faction that is foundationally the Free People of Elona, but with some special members or units with Free Awakened and the Order of Shadows, with some elite units being the Sunspears. This would potentially be the most good guy-centric faction in a potential RTS game that, when this game connects back to a mainline Guild Wars game, would canonically be the one who wins. You can then have an Awakened faction that is foundationally the Awakened with all the different types of Awakened we see, but then have the Morden Crescent as elite units. Obviously, this would be more of an evil faction that players could play, but also just be incredibly different than the Elonians. Then we could see a third faction of demons, think something along the lines of Morganites, that are encroaching on Tyria, specifically in Elona, and fighting the Awakened and Elonian factions for control of this area of the world. We could maybe even see demons commandeering some of the remaining branded left in the world and using them for their own purposes. Ultimately, I think all 3 of these factions are very different from one another and have unique vibes and ideas. Additionally, it would make a lot of sense for these 3 factions to be fighting one another with nobody allying with anybody else, and for all 3 factions to genuinely want to be in total control of Elona. Moving away from RTS games, there really could be a lot of single-player games that focus on a wide variety of topics, and when we look at games like this, I think they would really focus on very specific topics and not a wide range of topics like we see in an MMORPG. One adventure-focused game that could be really fun is where you play as a Norn character who is helping lead your people back north. You have to work your way into what we as a player know as unknown territory, and what the Norn have not known for a very long time. I think this type of game would be fun with a big focus on intense action combat against very large, powerful creatures that have made the Northern Shiver Peaks their home, that you have to defeat to clear the way while exploring a ton of cold, mountainous areas. On an extreme end, it could be kind of like a Souls-like game, but on the less extreme end, may be something more like the Witcher games. A different type of single-player game could be one that focuses a lot on the Dominion of Winds. Maybe you play as a Tengu and you're interacting a lot with the political intrigue within the Dominion of Winds, while exploring the Dominion of Winds in its entirety without leaving the borders. This could be a style of game that focuses more heavily on platforming within its exploration, really diving into the idea of jumping puzzles that we see in Guild Wars 2, which I think is something that would make a lot of sense just with the vibes of the Tengu, but also how I imagine the Dominion of Winds to be like. I think there are a lot of opportunities for some char-centric games as well that focus heavily on the ideas of the Connor or the Ghosts in Ascalon. Think back to the vibes of the Ghost of Ascalon novel, but in the form of a narrative single-player game. Or maybe you are engaging in a storyline related to cleansing the Full Fire as you dive into ancient Ascalonian ruins, or are interacting a lot with the political intrigue of the Char High Legions. In the former, this could be a big dungeon delving game, or in the latter could be a big political intrigue focused game. Blending the ideas of leading people back home and diving into ancient ruins, we could see a cave delving game that focuses a lot on the Asura, or maybe you are an Asuran leading your people back to the abandoned underground civilizations of the Asura now that Primordus has been defeated, where you explore the ruins, fighting whatever may be living there, while building everything back up. This could even be a type of game that is more survival and sandbox focused, like Minecraft as a crude example. This could potentially work well within the wider Guild Wars universe, because anything that players build underground in this game could canonically exist without anyone ever seeing it in a mainline Guild Wars game if there's never an expansion set underground. Truly, there are so many different ideas that could be taken and transformed into a standalone game or be utilized in a future Guild Wars 3 or in a future Guild Wars 2 expansion. Tyria is vast, and there are a lot of stories that could be picked up and utilized, but the most important thing to recognize is that we may never see a Guild Wars 3 or a standalone game, and this video was entirely for the fun of speculation. I would love to hear more speculation down in the comments if anyone has thoughts or ideas of their own. I hope you all are taking great care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.